Hi folks, in this lesson we're going to practice using the pen tool in Illustrator. This is a tool that lets us create custom shapes and we can add or delete anchor points from line segments with it. It's the perfect tool when you have artwork that needs a lot of precision. What we will learn in this lesson specifically is how to make straight and curved lines, how to add or delete anchor points, how to convert points, and then how to edit the lines. So before we jump into our project, let's get some vocabulary out of the way. A shape or a line is made of anchor points connected by path or line segments. Anchor points are these squares that you'll see running along the path. And then the line segments or the path segments are simply the lines that connect the anchor points. If you have a set of lines that are enclosed like this, then this is a shape. If you just have an open-ended line like this, then it is just a line. Now what I have right here is just a regular horizontal line. If I wanted to, I can convert this into a curved line, but when I do, you'll see it adds some extra tools or parts onto our line. These sticks right here are called handles, or sometimes you'll see them referred to as directional lines. What they allow us to do is they let us control how severe a curve on a line is. It even lets us control what corners look like. So for instance, right now these handles are moving in tandem with each other, but using the anchor point tool, I can actually break that connection. So that way it creates a nice sharp change of direction at that anchor point right here. Now you can see when I kind of broke the connection between these two handles, I now have this extra little widget here. This is a corner widget. What I did is when I broke this connection, I converted that anchor point from a smooth point, which is this, to a corner point, which is this. You can see it lets us create a more severe angle on our line. And when we create a corner point, you can also see it makes a corner widget, which allows us to round out this corner here. And you can see when it does that, it will create two extra anchor points to help create that small little curve. Right now for this lesson, the important vocabulary to know is this is an anchor point, these are path segments, and then these sticks are called handles, and they let us control the severity of a curve. Now that everyone is on the same page, let's jump into the project. What we will be doing is we are making this little Lochness graphic using the pen tool and our selection tools. When you download the starter file, you should see 3 artboards. 2 will have our trace lines to help us create our objects for the scene, and then this final artboard is where we'll combine everything together. So let's start off by zooming in to the first artboard here. Now what I've made here is these are images with dotted lines to help us figure out what angle the path segments need to go at. And then I've got dots where the anchor points need to go. Now your pen tool is going to be found in the tool panel to your left. It should be in one of the top 3 rows on your tool panel depending on your layout. If you don't immediately see it, look for one of these other symbols and right click, and it will bring up your pen tool. Or you can hit P on your keyboard as the shortcut. So what I'm going to do is, to make my life a little bit easier, is I'm just going to hit this arrow right here, and that's just going to put all my tools into a floating panel or a floating dock so I can have them nearby and you can easily see what tool I'm working with when I'm creating my different shapes. So first off, I'm just going to use my normal pen tool. You'll see these other tools here. The first one is your add anchor point tool, your delete anchor point tool, and then finally you have your anchor point tool. Each one of these do slightly different things, but the pen tool itself can actually switch between all these different tools by itself when you hover over existing shapes. So I'm just going to grab my normal pen tool to get us started. But when I hover over the canvas here, you'll see that I've got that pencil with that little no symbol. The reason that is showing up is because the layer I currently have selected is locked. So if I go over to my layers panel, If you don't immediately see this symbol off to your right, just go to Window and Layers and it will open the panel for you. And you can see the layer I have selected is the Final Scenes Guide. Basically what's on this layer are the guides down here. If I toggle the visibility on and off, you can see that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select the layer that says Final Scene. This way it'll be easier for me to keep my line work and my objects separate from the guides themselves, and I can easily just click those off when I want to just see my finished product. And you'll know you're on the right layer because one, it'll be highlighted in the layers panel, and also if I move my cursor over here, you should see that I now have that pen nib as my icon with the star at the corner. So before we start making our first shape, I'm going to change a couple more settings. I'm going to go over to Properties, or if you have your workspace set to Essentials Classic, you can go up to the top here. And what we're going to do is we're going to change our fill from that white or whatever your default is set to. And I'm just going to make sure that's set to none. That way when I go to make my shape, the middle of it will still be transparent so I can still see all of my guides. And then just double check that your stroke is set to black. And once I have those set up, I'm just going to double check. Let's go ahead and just leave our size at 1 point. We don't want our line work to be too big, especially for when we get into those finer details like the mouth section down here. So when I'm working with my pen tool, you notice right now it has a little star next to it. That means I'm about to create a brand new shape. If I were to hover over an anchor point, then that little star would turn into a minus, and if I was hovering over a path segment or a line segment, that would turn to a plus. You'll kind of see that later on in the project, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to my first little dot here. It doesn't really matter at what point you start at, but it'll be easier if you pick one of these outside dots for right now. So I'm just going to click once, and you can see that with my tool hovering over that anchor point, it changed to a minus. That means if I were going to click again, it would get rid of that anchor point. So I have my first anchor point, then I'm just going to go straight up. And you can see that if I hold shift, it doesn't really matter where I go on the canvas. It's always going to draw the line at a 45-degree increment. So if I go straight up, I clicked a little early. So if I go straight up, it'll create a perfectly vertical line. If I go straight left or right, it will create a perfectly horizontal line. And then as I kind of move around the anchor point, it can make a perfectly straight line at a 45-degree angle. But I just want to go up for right now. I'm going to click once here. Then I'm going to click once over here. Go down to the next dot, and I'm just clicking at each one of these. Now it's okay if you're a little bit off. I'll show you how to fix your placement here in a sec. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to skip this dot right here just to kind of show you how I can fix my shapes or how you can edit and reshape your paths with the pen tool. So I'm going to skip that one, go to the next line or the next dot, and then I'm just going to keep going around. And then if I wanted to leave my shape open-mouthed like this in order to just create a path, I can just hit escape and it will let me go. But if I want this to be an enclosed shape, what I would do is I would just keep going and click to the very end here. Now, because I went ahead and hit escape on my keyboard, technically this path is finished. Now, if I want to continue onto it, what I can do is as long as I have my pen tool selected, I can go to one of those end anchor points, and you'll see that little icon at the bottom of the pen nib changes to a slash. That means you are going to continue on to a path or a pre-existing path. So I'm going to click once on that end here, and you'll see that the preview is back and it's letting me build onto that path. So finally, I'm just going to go straight across. And then once I've reached the end point, you'll see that circle appears. That means that you've come back to the start. And if I click once, I now have a nice enclosed shape. Now you can see though, I've kind of got a couple spots where one, I missed this dot right here, and then this anchor point isn't quite as far over as I need it to be. So I'm going to switch over to my direct selection tool. Your direct selection tool is the white arrow right here. You can also hit A on your keyboard, and what I'm going to do is first off, I'm just going to click once on this anchor point to select it, and I'm just going to nudge it over so that way it is layered over the top of that red dot. Now I have this issue right here where I have a whole anchor point missing. What I can do is I can either directly grab the Add Anchor Point tool, or if I'm just working with the pen tool by itself and I hover over the path segment, you'll see that a plus sign appears next to the pen nib. And if I were to click on this path segment, it adds a whole new anchor point for me. So now I can just switch over to my direct selection tool. I can select this anchor point and then move it over to where it needs to be. And now I have the shape that I was trying to go for earlier. So now I'm going to go back to my pen tool and I'm going to add these detail lines that are depicted here. Now I don't want these to be an enclosed space or an enclosed shape. So in order to stop my work, I'm just going to hit escape on my keyboard. And now I can go back to making a completely new shape or line. So I'm going to click once, connect these. And then once I'm at the end, I hit escape. Then I just go down here. Hit escape. And then just make any adjustments you need to the lines. If you are having trouble trying to get the placement right on your pen tool, Illustrator has smart guides that are usually helpful most of the time of trying to get things aligned, but sometimes they can be a little bit too helpful. If you go to View and go to Smart Guides, you can actually temporarily turn those off, and it will just sometimes make it a little bit easier to manipulate objects and to precisely move anchor points where you need them to be, or it'll keep it from shifting your pen over to where it thinks you want it to go. It's not a huge deal whether you have it on or off. Just if it's bothering you, just go to View, Smart Guides, and it'll have a check mark next to it if it's on. If it's off, it won't have anything next to it. So I've got my rock here, but you can see that is just made up a bunch of straight lines. You're not always going to want this kind of jagged look to your shape. Sometimes you want a more organic form. So the way we can make that is there's a couple ways we can go about this. Tell you what, I'm going to start off in the middle here. I can either just click, and click, and now I have a couple of straight lines, and I can switch over. Let me hit escape. There we go. If I switch over to my anchor point tool or Shift C, what I can do is if I hover over these path segments, you'll see it kind of gives me that curved path segment icon. If I click and drag outward now, I can convert that straight line into a curved line. And then I can also, with this tool, kind of adjust my handles so that way they're kind of following more closely. Now you can move the handles up and down, and you can actually move them in and out too. That will also control how severe a curve is. So again, to do that, you just grab your anchor point tool, hover over a straight line, and then click and drag it out to where you want the curve to be. And then you can always finely tune it using those handles. Okay, so that is one way to create a curved line. Another way we can do it is there's another tool in here called the curvature tool that's handy. If you're doing really simple curves like this, it can be a helpful tool. So if I click once here, and then I'm not going to worry about it too much right now, but you can see as I go up, so unlike the pen tool where the default for your straight lines, with the curvature tool, the default line it makes is a curved line, and as I go from one anchor point to the next, it will automatically start curving that line for me. So if I just go up here, and then if I go up here, and go to this one, go to this one, and if I double click, it'll make it a hard corner. And if I go to the end and double click, it makes that a hard corner as well. So you can see that my curves are still a little bit off. With the curvature tool, I can actually add an anchor point to help fine tune these. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to switch over to my direct selection tool. One, I need to move this down. I'm going to use the anchor point tool to kind of convert that into a corner, because it didn't look like it quite did that the way I wanted to down here. Then I'm going to switch back to the direct selection tool. I'm going to grab these handles, kind of move until I'm hovering over. Hope you can see I missed. In order to bring those back, I just click on the path again. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to grab that handle. There we go. There we are, and then I'm going to use, so I'm going to switch back to the curvature tool. I'm going to double click on this to make it a sharp point. Switch back to my direct selection tool. Mess with these lines again. And it's alright if you're a little bit off from the guides. We just want the general shape. There we go. Now for this next one, I'm going to just use the pen tool. And rather than just creating a bunch of straight lines and then converting them later, I'm going to make some curved lines on the fly. So I'm going to click once here, go straight across, click once there. When I go up to this next point here, I'm going to click and drag outward without letting go of my mouse. And you can see it automatically creates those handles, and I can drag those around to get the curve I want. I can let go, go straight to the next one, click and drag out until I get the look I want. And I just keep going around until I get that nice wavy look for the kelp. Now you can kind of see it's not quite doing what I want down here. Once I finish off the shape, I can go back and fix that with the direct selection tool. Because one thing I'll have to do is I have to fix this curve up here, but I also need to break these handles. So that way, instead of being a smooth point, it's going to convert this point up here to a corner point. And then I'm going to click back at the start. There we go. And then just with my direct selection tool, I'm just going to go back in and adjust some of these curves. And then with the anchor point tool, I can click once to make that a corner. And then I'm just going to fix these curves right here. Okay, and then with this pen tool, I'm just going to click once, click and drag out to create that curve, click and drag out to create the curve. And again, if you can't quite get it to curve the way you want to, that's fine. Just create the curve as is and then go back and fix it later with the direct selection tool or your white arrow. And then to just make a path segment instead of an enclosed shape, just hit escape. And then I'm going to switch over to my white arrow to fix everything. Now for this, I think I am going to turn my smart guides back on so that way this anchor point will snap to where this anchor point is. And if you're kind of having the issue where it's only displaying one of the handles, just select the anchor point itself and it'll show you both handles related to that anchor point. Normally what it does is if you have an anchor point selected like this, is it'll show both of these handles and then it'll show the handle on the other end of the line segment. And if you want to see what these look like without the guidelines kind of blocking your view, you can always go over to layers, turn off guides, and you can see what it looks like without the guides there. Like for instance, I think this is a little bit hinky, so I'm just going to kind of shift that up a little bit. There we go. So our rock and our kelp are very simple examples of how to work with straight lines and how to work with curved lines. If we go down to our second artboard, you can see how you can make slightly more complicated shapes with the pen tool. So I'm going to just make sure I have my pen tool, and I'm actually going to go over to the tongue and the inner mouth because those are a little bit simpler. For right now, I'm just going to make straight lines, so I'm just going to tap, 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 and close the shape. Then I'm going to go over to my anchor point tool. I'm going to go to this segment. I'm going to click and drag it out, so that way the curve matches that guide there. I'm going to click, drag this out, and then finally click and drag that out. So I'm going to switch back over to my pen tool. I'm going to connect all these dots, and then I'm going to go to my anchor point tool, click and drag out. Click and drag out. And then those I think I can leave as is. I can always temporarily turn off my lines. I might add just a slight curve to these, yeah. Just to maybe that end one there. Okay, and then I'm going to scroll down to the flippers. These are slightly more complicated, but again, still fairly easy. So I'm going to go up to the upper flipper, tap once, go down here, click and hold, try and match up that curve as best I can. And then I'm going to go to the next one, click and hold, try and match that curve. Go to this one, click and hold. That one's not even close, but I can fix it here in a sec. And then finally close the shape. Now all I have to do is switch to my direct selection tool. Bring that down. Fix the curve a little bit. There we go, and I'm going to try my hand with this one. Switch to my pen tool. Click once, click and drag. Click and drag. And this one I think I'm actually going to click and drag here as well. There we go, and then just go in with my white arrow and fix these up. I wasn't even close on this one because my mouse actually got to the edge of my table here. See, for this one, I think I'm actually going to grab the anchor point tool and use that to help me nudge this into place. And if I need to, I can actually convert that back to help me get, there we go. And I'm going to bring this in. There we go. I think that's actually close enough. So now I'm going to go up to my more complicated shape, which is Nessie's body. So I'm going to go up here. I want to start with the easy part, which is the nostril. So I'm just switching back to my pen tool. Click and drag. Click and drag. Escape to end the segment. There we go. Now I'm going to jump over to this. So I'm going to click and drag outwards, just so that way I have a curve or a smooth point started, and I can fix it here later, which I probably will need to do. But next I'm just clicking and dragging, going up here, clicking and dragging outward. You can kind of see if you're not careful, it'll start your handles going in the wrong way. All you have to do is just rotate it back around to get it to go in the right direction again. I'm just going to click and drag. I'm starting off with kind of the easier parts of Nessie here, which are these big, long, smooth curves. And just as a reminder to zoom in and out on your canvases, if you hit Control or Command and then either minus or equal on your keyboard, that will let you zoom in and out very quickly in the canvas. And then to move it around, like I have here, if you hold space bar on your keyboard, it switches over to the hand tool, which lets you move your canvas around. So this whole time I'm just clicking and dragging. Just connecting all these points here. For this one, I think I'm going to make that a corner point, so I'm just going to click once. And then click and drag this. And then click and drag that. Now again, you can see in some parts I didn't even get close. That's fine. That is what the direct selection tool is for. So I can just grab a handle here, just kind of twist it around. I think I need to fix this anchor point first. There we go. And I want to be able to move this anchor point to change this curve without radically changing this one. So I'm going to, you can see right now both my handles are moving in tandem with each other. I want this one to move independently of this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back to my anchor point tool. I'm just going to click on this handle, click and hold it, and then twist it around to where I need it to go. And now when I switch back to my direct selection tool, I can move these anchor points without worrying about what it's doing down at the bottom of the jaw here. And I'm going to fix this. There we go. I'm actually pretty happy with that. I think what I want to do though is if I look over at this corner here, it creates a really sharp point. I kind of want to smooth out the curves on Nessie here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my selection tool, which is the black arrow. I'm going to select this line segment I just made. I'm not going to worry about the nose for right now, but I've got the body of Nessie selected, and then I'm going to go over to the properties panel, or if you have the Essentials Classic workspace, you can go up to here, click on the word stroke. Don't click on the square that's next to it. Click on the actual word stroke. Mine appeared way up there for some reason. Let me try this one. There we go. So when you click on stroke, it brings up this new panel that lets you control the weight, which you can control from over here, but it also controls some of the different looks of your line. You can either add a rounded cap to the ends of your segments. You can make your corners less severe, which is what we want to do. You can also control where that stroke sits on your path segment. So right now, if we were to zoom in on our shape here, you can see that red line is going through the middle of our black line. That's how our stroke is aligned, is line is going through the middle of the stroke. We can actually change this so that way the coloring or the stroke is on the inside of the line, or we can set it so it's on the outside. And then this is also where you can create your dashed lines. If you wanted to add arrowheads onto your shape, you can do that from this menu here. And then you can also change kind of the profile of your line as well. What we're going to be worried about is we're going to go to corner and we're going to select this middle option. That's just going to add smooth corners to our shape here. And then I'm going to select my nostril and I'm going to change these caps to rounded caps. Just so that way our little cartoon here has a bit of a softer edge to it, or a softer feel. I think I'm going to fix her neck a little bit here. No. There we go. I'm just going to turn my guides back on. And I'm going to temporarily unlock my guides because I actually want to select this eyeball here. So I'm going to temporarily on the lines layer just unlock it by hitting that padlock in the layers panel. Again, if you can't find the layers panel, just go to Window, Layers, it'll pop open. So I'm going to Guides, I'm going to unlock this layer, I'm going to select both the pupil and the eyeball here. And I actually want to move it onto the same layer as my line work, because I'm actually going to use that eyeball for my finished piece. So an easy way to move objects between layers is you can either find them in the list here and then just drag them to the appropriate layer, or what we can do is if you go over to this colored square here, you can click and drag that up to the layer you want to move the objects to, and you can see that red or that pink square appeared. When I let go, now the outline on those objects are red, and if I turn off Final Scene, my eyeballs disappear as well. So I'm going to go ahead and hide guides. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up to my rock and my kelp, and I'm going to apply some colors to it. So I'm going to grab this first shape here that we made, the outline. And I'm going to go over to my swatches panel. If you don't immediately see like this checkerboard icon to your right, just go to Window and Swatches. And it'll pop it open. And if you look in this section here, right above the grayscale, there's a bunch of pre-made colors already set up for us. I'm going to leave the stroke color black, and I want to change the fill on these. So I know I have the fill selected because the solid square is on top. I'm going to select that brown color I have right here. And if I hover over that color, you'll see it's named rock. And now I've got my rock. And if I go over to my kelp, I'm making sure I'm selecting the outer line rather than this inner line here. If I were to select this inner line and then I go to apply the kelp color, you can see because it's not an enclosed space, the way the color is applied to it is a little unpredictable. It will basically just try and color in the section and connect your two endpoints. So with a curve like this, it's going to create this really weird kind of harp look. So I'm not going to apply any color to this middle line. I want to apply it to the outer line here. If I click the kelp color, you can see I've applied the kelp color, but now my middle line has disappeared. What I can do is I can right click, go to arrange, send backward, and then that vein or that middle line should reappear again. Another way to do that is to hold Control or Command and then left bracket. If you hold the Command or Control and hit left bracket, that sends things backwards. If you hit right bracket, that brings things forwards. So I'm going to go over here, apply the same color to it. Then I'm going to go down to Nessie. I'm going to select her outer body here. And then this color here, you can see it's called Nessie's skin. I'm just going to apply that. I've got the same issue where my nostril disappeared, so I'm just going to hit Control or Command, left bracket to bring it back. Then I'm going to select the tongue. And you can see that light green is called Nessie tongue. I'm going to select the inner mouth, and I'm going to select the corresponding color, which is that darker green, or that darker blue-green. Then I'm going to select the flippers here, and to select more than one object at a time, since these are both the same color, I'm just going to click on one, hold shift, click on the other. Then I'm going to select Nessie's skin. So now that I've got everything made, it's now just a matter of moving it over here, so that way I have my little cartoon. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just click out in the empty part of my canvas. I'm going to click and drag out so that way I select both the eyeball parts, the nostril, and Nessie's body. I'm going to select all of these objects. I'm going to right click. I want to hit group. And so now no matter what object I select, it's always going to select the whole body here. So I'm going to go ahead and move her over here, and rather than just completely moving her over with the selection tool, I'm actually going to hold Alt on my keyboard, then click and drag, so that way I still have my original over here. Now you can see when we move Nessie over, we can still see the guidelines. Our shape isn't transparent, it's just with the way I have the layer set up, is these guides are layered on top of where we're adding our shapes. So I'm just going to grab Nessie over here and I'm going to try and move her into place as best I can. If you're having issues getting her in the right spot, you can actually use your arrow keys to nudge shapes in different directions. Then I'm going to hold, with my direct selection tool, I'm just holding Alt, click and dragging the tongue over, duplicating the inner mouth as well. And I'm going to zoom in to add these pieces. So I want the inner mouth added in first. And I'm going to put that here, try and line up with the shapes, and then I'm going to grab the tongue, move that over here. Now if you have the issue that I have here where the tongue is going behind the mouth, again I'm just going to hit Control or Command, right bracket, and I'm just going to keep hitting that right bracket until the tongue reappears. Or as long as you have it selected, you can right click, go to Arrange, bring forward, keep doing that until it comes to the front, or you can shortcut all that and just go to right click, Arrange, bring to front, and I'll stack it on top. So if you want, you can go back to your layers panel and just temporarily hide those guides to kind of see how it's looking. I think I need to shift the mouth back a little. I think I actually need to go over, I'm going to select the tongue and I'm going to go to stroke and I'm going to round out those corners. So that way they're just a little less obvious. And I'm going to send my tongue backwards so that way Nessie's body is layered on top of it. And I did that just by holding Control or Command and then hitting the left bracket. Okay. Then I'm going to go ahead and grab my flippers. Now you can see from my guide, Nessie has 4 flippers, but we've only got 2. We're just going to duplicate these like we did with these parts over here. So with my direct selection tool, holding Alt, click and drag, holding Alt, clicking and dragging. And I'm just going to move these first 2 flippers into place. They should be at the right angle where we can actually just layer them over the guides. And again, I'm going to smooth out my corners. So with this first flipper selected, I'm just going to stroke using the round joint. I'm going to select this one. Oop. I double clicked it, so that put me into isolation mode. Isolation mode is good for when you want to edit an object without having to worry about interacting with the other objects around it in the scene. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to get out of isolation mode by double clicking on that arrow. You can also get out of it by hitting escape on your keyboard. So I'm just going to move this into place, and then I'm going to add a round joint to that as well. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use this flipper for these other 2 flippers here. So I'm going to select this, hold Alt, drag it over here, and then I'm going to right click, arrange, bring to front. So it should layer it on top of my body here. And then with the direct selection tool, if I go up to the corner just outside the bounding box, you should see that your cursor turns to a double-ended arrow. If I click on that, that actually lets me rotate the whole shape here. Now I think I've kind of got this top part where I need it to be, but this bottom part needs to be rotated more. Now if I rotate it with the direct selection tool, what it's going to do is it's going to rotate it from the center. I'm actually wanting to temporarily move my point of rotation up to the top here. That way it's a little easier to place this bottom section in the right spot. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to switch over to my rotation tool, which is this tool right here. Looks like a arrow going in a circle. You can also hit R on your keyboard as the shortcut. I'm going to click once at the top of my flipper, and then I'm just going to click out here and drag down, and you can see that it is pivoting my flipper at that anchor point I added, or at the rotation point I added. Then I'm just going to switch back over to my direct selection tool. I'm going to hold Alt, duplicate my flipper up here. This time I'm going to grab my rotation tool again. I'm going to click over here where that anchor point is, and I'm just going to angle it down just a tad. There we go. And if I deselect everything and hide my guides, Nessie looks great, but I don't really like how you can see the outer bounds of our flippers here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my direct selection tool, which is the white arrow. I'm going to click once on this arc right here. Then I'm just going to hit backspace on my keyboard, and it gets rid of that line segment. So instead of creating an enclosed shape, I now just have a path. Now again, with situations like this, we do have to keep in mind kind of how it closes that shape when we apply color to it. Since Nessie is going to be one solid color, I'm not too worried about the seam that's created right here. So if I were to move this flipper off to the side, you can see it just kind of cuts off by connecting those 2 points. Since Nessie is a solid color, I'm not going to worry about it. If we were adding shading or gradient to her, that might look a little weird. But I'm not going to worry about it for right now. So again, I'm grabbing my direct selection tool. I'm going to click on the arc right here, or the path. Then I'm going to hit backspace. And there we go. So now I'm going to turn my final scene guides back on. I'm going to go up here. I'm going to grab my direct selection tool. I'm going to select everything I've used to make the rock. I'm going to hit Control G to group it, or you can hit Command G if you're on Mac, or you can just right click and group it that way. I'm going to do the same thing with the kelp here. I'm going to select all of these. I'm going to right click, group, and now with my direct selection tool, I'm going to hold Alt. I'm just going to click and drag my kelp down here. I'm going to click and drag my rocks. And then I'm going to move my rocks into place according to the guide, so I can use my arrows to nudge things if I need to. I'm going to move the kelp down here, using my arrow keys to nudge them into place. Now before I call it good, I actually want my bubbles to be in front of the rock here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just selecting the rock. I'm in Command or Control left bracket. And I'm just going to keep hitting that until my bubbles appear. So at the end, if I hide my final scene guides, there we go. I now have my cute little Lochness monster graphic. Now if I wanted to print this out, or if you want to be able to post this somewhere, you don't really need these pieces here, but if you just want this final piece, what you can do is you can go to File, Export, Export As, and then if you checkmark Use Artboards, you can actually select Range and then tell it you only want the third artboard, and when you hit Export, it's only going to export the third artboard. And then Save Type lets you pick out what file type you want it to use, and then you can use file name to put in the file name you want to use. If you're just going to leave this as an AI file, you can go ahead and just hit File Save or File Save As, and that is the end of our project. So here you go. You can see this is just a very simple project that let us practice using the pen tool. It's very versatile. It's very helpful for making very precise shapes. So when maybe a square or a circle or a polygon isn't quite what we need, and we need more organic or more weird looking shapes, we can just use our pen tool to make the kind of shape we need it to. We can even edit that shape by adding or subtracting anchor points from it, and then we can refine it using our direct selection tool. There we go. Now that you're a little more familiar with the pen tool, you can start experimenting with it to create your own artwork. And something else to note is that the pen tool in Illustrator works the same way as it does in Photoshop and InDesign. So hopefully this lesson will help you make some great things in those programs as well. Thanks for joining me. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what we create in the future. I'll see you next time.